The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Buckhead, Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhood, when the tranquil Sunday quiet was shattered by a scream that would haunt everyone who heard it. Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to prepare yourselves for what you're about to hear today, because this story will forever change the way you look at weddings, love, and the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the most perfect facades. When wedding guests arrived for the post-ceremony brunch at the Thompson residence, they discovered something that would make national headlines and expose a web of financial fraud, domestic abuse, and racial prejudice that ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The groom, Malik Thompson, was found locked in the trunk of his own Mercedes-Benz, bloodied and barely conscious, while his bride, Keisha Williams, had vanished without a trace. But that discovery was just the beginning of one of the most twisted and racially charged cases in Atlanta's history. What started as a missing person investigation would eventually expose a serial predator who had been using society's racial biases to cover his tracks for years, leaving a trail of victims that investigators had overlooked because of their own unconscious prejudices. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, Keisha's mother, was the first to spot the partially open trunk. The 55-year-old retired school teacher had arrived early to help set up the brunch, carrying a family heirloom, a diamond necklace that had been passed down through 3 generations of Williams women. She had planned to surprise her daughter with it as a special wedding gift. "Why is the trunk open?" she muttered to herself, approaching the gleaming black sedan. When she peered inside, her blood-curdling scream pierced the morning air, bringing wedding guests running from all directions. There, crammed into the trunk like a discarded piece of luggage, was Malik Thompson, the successful financial analyst who just 24 hours earlier had been the picture of masculine confidence and success. The sight was grotesque. Malik's wedding suit was torn and stained with blood, his face swollen and discolored. A gash across his forehead had left dried blood caked in his hair. His arms were zip-tied behind his back, and duct tape had been wrapped around his ankles. Most disturbing of all, there was a manila folder stuffed underneath his body, containing documents that would later prove to be the key to unraveling his entire criminal enterprise. "Call 911! Someone call 911!" Mrs. Williams screamed, her voice breaking with terror and confusion. "Where's my daughter? Where's Keisha?" The wedding guests stood frozen in shock, unable to process what they were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen, not in Buckhead, not to people like them. As paramedics worked to revive Malik, one detail would prove crucial to the investigation. Despite being found in his own trunk, despite being the apparent victim of a violent crime, Malik's first words upon regaining consciousness weren't about his injuries or his attackers. Instead, he kept repeating, "The documents? Where are the documents?" To understand the true horror of what happened, we need to rewind 24 hours to what appeared to be the perfect Atlanta society wedding. The contrast between the joy of that day and the nightmare that followed would prove to be a carefully orchestrated deception that fooled everyone, including the police. May 15th, 2023, dawned bright and clear in Atlanta, Georgia. The wedding of Keisha Williams and Malik Thompson was set to take place at the prestigious Atlanta Botanical Garden, with its stunning spring blooms providing a picture-perfect backdrop for what society pages would later call the wedding of the season. Keisha Williams, 28, was everything a modern bride should be: educated, beautiful, and poised. Standing 5'6", with rich mahogany skin and natural hair styled in elegant locks, she had graduated summa cum laude from Spelman College with a degree in psychology and was working as a counselor at a community mental health center in East Atlanta. She came from a middle-class family in East Point, and her marriage to Malik was seen as a significant step up in social status. But there was something in Keisha's eyes that day that only her closest friends noticed, a fear that seemed to deepen every time Malik approached her. During the ceremony, as she stood at the altar in her $8,000 designer gown, her hands trembled slightly as she held her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. Malik Thompson, 32, was the epitome of black excellence in Atlanta's social circles. A senior financial analyst at Peachtree Capital Management, he earned a 6-figure salary and lived in a $2.5 million mansion on Lake Lanier. Standing 6'1", with caramel-colored skin and a perfectly groomed beard, he looked every inch the successful businessman in his custom-tailored tuxedo. To everyone watching, Malik appeared to be the perfect husband, attentive, successful, and clearly devoted to his bride. But what the 300 wedding guests didn't notice were the subtle signs of control and manipulation that had been building for months. The way Malik's hand would tighten on Keisha's arm when she spoke to other people, the way he would answer questions directed at her, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at his bride. The ceremony itself was flawless. Reverend Dr. Michael Davis, pastor of Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, officiated with the kind of gravitas and warmth that made everyone in attendance believe they were witnessing something truly special. The gospel choir from Keisha's childhood church filled the air with amazing grace, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. But even during this perfect moment, careful observers might have noticed something troubling. When Reverend Davis asked, "Do you, Keisha, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" there was a pause, just a fraction of a second, before she whispered, "I do." And when Malik slipped the platinum wedding band onto her finger, his grip was so tight that Keisha winced. Among the wedding guests was Detective Marcus Johnson, 45, a veteran investigator with the Atlanta Police Department who had worked with Keisha on several cases involving domestic violence victims. Marcus, a tall, imposing man with graying temples and keen eyes, had been invited because of his professional relationship with Keisha. He had brought his wife Sarah, a pediatric nurse at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Even in the midst of the celebration, Marcus's trained eye picked up on subtle warning signs. The way Malik monitored Keisha's interactions with other guests. The way he steered conversations away from topics that might involve Keisha's work or personal interests. The way Keisha seemed to shrink slightly whenever Malik placed his hand on her back. "Something's not right," Marcus whispered to his wife during the ceremony. "Watch how he treats her. That's not love, that's ownership." Sarah squeezed her husband's hand. "Maybe you're being too suspicious. It's their wedding day. People act differently when they're nervous." But Marcus had investigated enough domestic violence cases to recognize the signs, the isolation, the control, the way Malik's charm seemed to turn on and off like a switch depending on who was watching. The reception at the Four Seasons Atlanta was a spectacle of elegance and excess that would have made any bride proud. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. The guest list read like a who's who of Atlanta's black professional elite. Doctors, lawyers, business executives, and community leaders. But beneath the surface of celebration, tensions were building that would soon explode into violence. The first sign of trouble came when Brandon Hayes, Keisha's ex-fiancé, approached the head table to offer his congratulations. Brandon, a 30-year-old corporate lawyer with piercing blue eyes and an athletic build, had dated Keisha for 3 years before their relationship ended 18 months earlier. "Malik, congratulations, man," Brandon said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You really won the prize. I hope you know how to take care of what belongs to you now." The words seemed innocent enough to casual observers, but Malik's reaction was immediate and telling. His jaw clenched, and he pulled Keisha closer to his side in a gesture that was more possessive than protective. "Thanks for coming, Brandon," Malik replied, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I'm sure Keisha appreciates your support." But it was Keisha's reaction that was most disturbing. Instead of feeling protected by her new husband, she seemed to shrink between the two men, her eyes darting nervously between them like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. Jasmine Cooper, Keisha's maid of honor and best friend since college, witnessed this exchange from across the room. Jasmine, a 27-year-old graphic designer with natural hair and an infectious laugh, had been Keisha's closest confidant for over 6 years. She had watched her friend's relationship with Malik with growing concern, but had struggled to put her finger on exactly what was wrong. "Girl, you need to stay away from Brandon," Jasmine whispered to Keisha later when they found themselves alone in the ladies' room. "Malik looks like he's about to explode." Keisha checked her reflection in the mirror, adjusting her lipstick with shaking hands. "I know. I didn't want to invite Brandon, but Malik insisted. He said it would look suspicious if I didn't invite my ex to the wedding." "Suspicious of what?" Jasmine asked, but before Keisha could answer, the bathroom door opened and Malik appeared. "What's taking so long?" he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that made both women flinch. "People are asking where the bride is." "I was just fixing my makeup," Keisha said quickly, but Malik had already noticed the tension in the room. Jasmine, I need to speak with my wife privately, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jasmine reluctantly left, but not before catching Keisha's eye in the mirror and seeing the fear there. Once they were alone, Malik's demeanor changed completely. Gone was the charming groom, replaced by something much darker. You're not going to embarrass me tonight, he said quietly, his hand gripping Keisha's arm hard enough to leave bruises. You're going to smile, you're going to be the perfect wife, and you're going to forget about whatever little scheme you think you're planning. I don't know what you're talking about, Keisha whispered, but her voice betrayed her fear. Don't lie to me, Keisha. I know you've been snooping around my office. I know you've been asking questions about my work. That ends tonight. His grip tightened. You belong to me now, legally, financially, in every way that matters. And if you even think about trying to leave me or expose me, I'll make sure you regret it. The threat hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Keisha nodded quickly, tears forming in her eyes, and Malik's expression immediately softened back into his public persona. Good, now let's get back to our guests. And remember, smile. The drive from the Four Seasons to Malik's Lake Lanier mansion should have been a romantic end to a perfect day. Instead, it became the final act in a carefully orchestrated plan that had been months in the making. As their limousine wound through Atlanta's northern suburbs, Keisha sat in silence, her wedding dress spread around her like a beautiful shroud. You were perfect tonight, Malik said, his hand possessively stroking her thigh. My colleagues were all impressed. Dr. Reynolds said you'd be a perfect addition to the country club's charity board. Keisha nodded mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere. Hidden in her purse was a small USB drive containing copies of documents she had discovered in Malik's home office 3 weeks earlier. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, client account information, and most damning of all, loan applications in her name that she had never signed. The discovery had been accidental. Malik had left his computer unlocked while taking a shower, and Keisha had simply been looking for a phone charger when she saw the files. What she found made her blood run cold. Her husband-to-be wasn't just a successful financial analyst. He was a criminal who had been systematically stealing from his clients for years. But the documents revealed something even more sinister. Malik had been researching her background, her family, her finances. He had deliberately targeted her, not out of love, but because she fit a specific profile. Young, black, from a working-class family, with limited financial resources and social connections. Someone who would be easy to manipulate and control. Someone who, if she disappeared or was discredited, wouldn't be believed by the authorities. I've been thinking about our honeymoon, Malik continued, seemingly oblivious to her distress. Maybe we should extend it. Take a month in Europe. I've been working so hard lately, and I deserve a break. What he didn't say was that he needed time to implement the final phase of his plan. The loan applications in Keisha's name would be processed while they were gone. By the time they returned, he would have access to over $500,000 in credit that he could quickly liquidate and transfer to offshore accounts. And if anyone came looking for the money, it would be Keisha who would take the fall. The mansion came into view as they crested the hill overlooking Lake Lanier. The 6,000-square-foot house sat on 5 acres of pristine lakefront property, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. To anyone driving by, it looked like the perfect setting for a fairy tale ending. Malik carried Keisha across the threshold in the traditional gesture, but there was nothing romantic about the way he held her. His grip was too tight, his smile too cold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson," he said, setting her down in the marble foyer. "I hope you're ready for your new life." The house had been prepared for their arrival, rose petals scattered across the floor, champagne chilling in an ice bucket, candles casting romantic shadows on the walls. But Keisha felt like she was entering a beautifully decorated prison. "I need a few minutes to change," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could you pour the champagne?" Malik nodded and headed to the kitchen, leaving Keisha alone for the first time in hours. She climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Hidden in her overnight bag was a small bottle of Ambien that she had been saving for this moment. The plan was simple but dangerous. She would drug Malik's champagne, wait for him to fall asleep, and then execute her escape. But what she didn't know was that she wasn't the only one with a plan for that night. From the romantic anticipation of a wedding night, the atmosphere shifted to one of calculated desperation. Keisha stood in the master bedroom, her hands shaking as she crushed 2 Ambien tablets into powder. The medication was a remnant from her own struggle with insomnia following her father's death 2 years earlier. But tonight, it would serve a different purpose. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times, but the reality was far more terrifying than she had imagined. If Malik discovered what she was doing, she had no doubt that he would kill her. The documents she had found weren't just evidence of financial fraud. They were proof that she wasn't his first victim. Buried in his files were references to 2 other women, Maria Santos, a 26-year-old Latina woman who had worked as a bank teller, and Alicia Johnson, a 24-year-old black woman who had been a paralegal. Both had dated Malik, both had discovered his criminal activities, and both had mysteriously disappeared within months of their discoveries. The police reports she had found made it clear that neither woman had been taken seriously by investigators. Maria was dismissed as an illegal immigrant who had probably fled back to Mexico. Alicia was labeled as a troubled young woman who had a history of mental health issues. Both cases had been closed within weeks, their disappearances explained away by racial stereotypes and institutional bias. Keisha wasn't going to let the same thing happen to her. She carefully mixed the crushed Ambien into one of the champagne glasses, then returned downstairs where Malik was waiting. The living room had been transformed into a romantic setting, with soft jazz playing and candles flickering on every surface. "To us," Malik said, raising his glass with a smile that no longer fooled her. "To our new beginning." "To new beginnings," Keisha echoed, watching as he drained the champagne in one long gulp. Now, all she had to do was wait. But what neither of them knew was that they were being watched. Vincent Moore, a 35-year-old ex-convict with a scarred face and cold eyes, had been parked in a stolen van across the street for the past 2 hours. Vincent had been hired by Malik weeks earlier to handle what he called potential complications after the wedding. The plan was simple. If Keisha proved to be a problem, Vincent would make her disappear, just like he had done with Maria and Alicia. The $50,000 fee was more than enough to ensure his silence and his efficiency. As the Ambien began to take effect, Malik started to sway slightly. "I feel strange," he mumbled, his words beginning to slur. "Did you put something in my drink?" "You're just tired," Keisha said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's been a long day. Let me help you upstairs." She guided him toward the staircase, but Malik was heavier than she expected, and his coordination was rapidly deteriorating. Halfway up the stairs, he collapsed, his weight pulling them both down. "What did you do to me?" he whispered, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. You drugged me." "I know what you've been doing," Keisha said, her voice gaining strength now that her secret was out. "I know about the money you've stolen. I know about Maria and Alicia. I know about the loans you've taken out in my name." Malik tried to grab her, but his movements were clumsy and uncoordinated. "You don't understand," he slurred. "I did this for us, for our future." "You did this for yourself," Keisha replied, stepping away from him. "And it ends tonight." As Malik lost consciousness, Keisha ran back upstairs to gather her things. She had maybe 30 minutes before he would be completely under, and she needed to be gone before then. But as she stuffed her few belongings into a bag, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. Glass breaking downstairs. Someone was in the house. The transition from controlled escape to chaotic terror happened in an instant. Keisha froze at the top of the stairs, her bag half packed, as she heard heavy footsteps moving through the house below. Multiple voices were talking in low, urgent tones, but she couldn't make out the words. "Check upstairs," a gruff voice commanded. "The wife should be up there." Keisha's heart hammered against her ribs. These weren't random burglars. They knew about her, knew about the house layout, knew that she would be upstairs, which meant only one thing. Malik had planned this. She grabbed her cell phone and quickly dialed Jasmine's number, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. "Keisha? Girl, it's 2 a.m. What's wrong?" Jasmine's voice was thick with sleep, but it immediately became alert when she heard the panic in her friend's voice. "Jasmine, I need you to listen carefully," Keisha whispered, pressing herself against the bedroom door. I'm at Malik's house. There are men here. They're looking for me. I think Malik hired them. What? Are you serious? Should I call the police? No! Keisha's response was immediate and urgent. Not yet. There's something I need to tell you first. Malik is not who we thought he was. He's a criminal, Jasmine. He's been stealing money from his clients, and I think he's killed people before. I have proof. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made her voice drop to barely a whisper. They're coming upstairs. If something happens to me, there's a USB drive in my purse. It has everything. Bank records, client information, evidence of what he's been doing. You have to get it to the police. Keisha, what are you talking about? This is insane. Just call 911. I can't. They won't believe me. I'm a black woman accusing a successful black man of being a criminal. They'll think I'm lying or crazy or both. But you have to promise me you'll get that evidence to someone who will listen. The bedroom door handle turned, and Keisha's breath caught in her throat. But the door was locked, and she heard cursing from the other side. Open the door, lady, a voice called out. We just want to talk. Keisha grabbed the USB drive from her purse and shoved it into her bra. If they were going to take her, at least the evidence would be safe. She moved to the window and looked out at the lake. It was a 20-foot drop to the water, but it might be her only chance. I'm going to try to get out through the window, she whispered into the phone. Meet me at the old cabin where we used to go in college. You remember the place? The one on Chattahoochee River? Keisha, that's 2 hours away. I know, but if I can get there, I'll be safe. And if I don't make it, her voice broke. If I don't make it, you know what to do. The bedroom door splintered as someone kicked it from the other side. Keisha dropped the phone and ran to the window, struggling with the latch. Behind her, she could hear the men breaking through the door. There she is! A voice shouted. Don't let her get away. Keisha finally got the window open and looked down at the dark water below. It was either jump or face whatever these men had planned for her. She climbed onto the windowsill just as hands grabbed her from behind. Got her! The man's grip was like iron, pulling her back into the room. Boss is going to be happy. But Keisha wasn't going down without a fight. She twisted in his grasp and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, causing him to grunt and loosen his hold. She broke free and ran for the door, but there was another man waiting in the hallway. Going somewhere, princess? Vincent Moore stepped into the light, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. Mr. Thompson said you might be a problem. He was right. What do you want? Keisha demanded, backing away from him. Nothing personal, sweetheart. Just business. Your husband paid me to clean up his mess. And unfortunately for you, you're the mess. Keisha's mind raced. Malik was unconscious downstairs, so he couldn't have given these men instructions tonight, which meant he had planned this in advance. He had known she would try to escape, and he had prepared for it. How much is he paying you? She asked, stalling for time. Vincent laughed. More than you'll ever see, that's for sure. Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. What happened to Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson? The question caught Vincent off guard, and his smile faltered for just a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You killed them for Malik, didn't you? Just like you're going to kill me. Vincent's expression darkened. Those bitches should have minded their own business, just like you should have. It was a confession, and Keisha knew she had to find a way to survive long enough to tell someone. She feinted to the left, then dove to the right, trying to get past Vincent and reach the stairs. But he was faster than she expected, and his hand closed around her ankle, sending her crashing to the floor. Like I said, Vincent growled, dragging her back toward him. Easy way or hard way, your choice. The contrast between the chaos of the discovery and the systematic approach of the investigation was stark. By 10:30 a.m., the Thompson mansion was swarming with police officers, paramedics, and crime scene technicians. What had started as a welfare check had quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation involving multiple agencies. Detective Marcus Johnson had been off duty, enjoying a rare Sunday morning with his family, when he received the call. His captain's voice was grim. Johnson, I need you at a scene in Buckhead. Missing person case, but there's more to it. The victim is someone you know, Keisha Williams. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had worked with Keisha on several domestic violence cases, and he had tremendous respect for her intelligence and dedication. The thought of her being in danger made his blood run cold. I'll be right there, he said, already reaching for his keys. The scene at the Thompson mansion was controlled chaos. The driveway was filled with emergency vehicles, and uniformed officers had cordoned off the entire property. Marcus flashed his badge and made his way to the command post that had been set up in the front yard. Detective Ray Williams, a 20-year veteran with a reputation for cutting corners, was already on scene. Williams was a stocky white man in his 50s with graying hair and a perpetual scowl. He had a reputation for being dismissive of cases involving people of color, and Marcus had clashed with him before. "What do we know?" Marcus asked, pulling out his notebook. "Looks like a domestic situation gone wrong," Williams replied, not looking up from his own notes. "Black woman, probably got greedy, tried to rob her rich husband, thing went sideways. She's probably halfway to Mexico by now." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Have you interviewed the husband? What does he say happened?" "He's still pretty out of it. Paramedics say he was drugged. Wife probably slipped him something, then tried to clean out his bank accounts. When he woke up, she panicked and ran. And the fact that he was found tied up in his own trunk?" Williams shrugged. "Could be part of the setup. Make it look like he was the victim. These people are smarter than they look." The casual racism in Williams' comment made Marcus's hands clench into fists. "These people? What exactly do you mean by that?" "You know what I mean, Johnson. Don't get all politically correct on me. We've seen this before. Gold digger marries rich man, tries to take him for everything he's worth. When it doesn't work out, she goes to plan B." Marcus took a deep breath and forced himself to remain professional. "Have you searched the house? Any signs of forced entry? Any indication of a struggle?" "House is clean. No signs of a break-in. Only blood is from the husband's head wound. My guess is she hit him with something, dragged him to the car, then took off when she realized she was in over her head." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He had seen too many domestic violence cases to accept such a simple explanation. "I want to interview the husband myself, and I want to talk to the friend who called 911. "Suit yourself," Williams said. "But you're wasting your time. This is a simple case. Woman gets greedy, woman gets stupid, woman gets caught. She'll turn up in a few days when the money runs out." Marcus ignored him and walked toward the house. The front door was open, and he could see crime scene technicians dusting for fingerprints and photographing the scene. The living room showed signs of a struggle. Overturned furniture, broken glass, a few drops of blood on the hardwood floor. But something bothered him about the scene. If Keisha had drugged her husband and was planning to rob him, why would she leave behind such obvious evidence of a fight? And why would she take the time to tie him up and put him in the trunk? It would have been much easier to just leave him unconscious in the house. He made his way upstairs to the master bedroom, where more technicians were working. The bed was unmade, and there were women's clothes scattered on the floor. But what caught his attention was the window. It was wide open, and there were scuff marks on the sill. "Did anyone check the lake?" he asked one of the technicians. "Divers are on the way," the tech replied. "But if she went in the water, it's going to be hard to find her. Lake's pretty deep here." Marcus nodded and headed back downstairs. He needed to talk to Malik Thompson, but first he wanted to interview Jasmine Cooper, the friend who had called 911. Something about this case didn't add up, and he had a feeling that the answers lay in the details that Detective Williams was too prejudiced to see. He found Jasmine sitting in a police car, her eyes red from crying. She looked up when he approached, and he could see the fear and confusion in her expression. "Ms. Cooper, I'm Detective Johnson. I worked with Keisha on some cases at the community center. I need to ask you some questions." Jasmine nodded, wiping her eyes. "I've been trying to tell the other detective, but he won't listen. Keisha wouldn't just run away. Something happened to her, something terrible. Why don't you tell me what you know?" Marcus said gently. "Start from the beginning." The meticulous process of gathering evidence began to paint a picture that was far more complex than Detective Williams's simple theory. As Marcus interviewed Jasmine Cooper, he began to understand that this case was about much more than a gold-digging wife and a wealthy husband. "Keisha called me at 2 a.m., Jasmine said, her voice shaking. She was terrified. She said there were men in the house, and she thought Malik had hired them. She kept saying something about documents, about proof of what he'd been doing." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of documents?" "I don't know exactly. She said she had found evidence that Malik was stealing money from his clients. She said she had proof that he'd done this before, to other women. She was scared that if she went to the police, they wouldn't believe her. Why wouldn't they believe her? Jasmine's expression became bitter. Because she's a black woman accusing a successful black man of being a criminal. She said the police would think she was lying or crazy or both. And looking at how that other detective treated me, she shook her head. Maybe she was right. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Keisha was right about Malik's criminal activities, then this wasn't a simple domestic dispute. It was something much darker. Did she say anything else? Any other details about these documents? She mentioned names, Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson. She said Malik had done this to them before, and they had disappeared. She was afraid the same thing would happen to her. Marcus made a note to look up those names. If there were other victims, it would change everything about this case. Ms. Cooper, I need to ask you something important. Do you think there's any possibility that Keisha was lying about any of this? That she might have been planning to rob her husband? Jasmine's response was immediate and forceful. No, absolutely not. Keisha is the most honest person I know. She works with domestic violence victims detective. She knows how these cases get handled by the system. She would never make something like this up. Marcus believed her. There was a sincerity in Jasmine's voice that convinced him she was telling the truth. But he also knew that he would need more than just her word to convince his superiors that this case was more complex than it appeared. Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything that might help us find her? Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then reached into her purse. She mentioned something about a USB drive. She said she had evidence on it. I don't know if she had it with her when she disappeared, but if she did, then whoever took her might have it now, Marcus finished. Or they might be looking for it. He thanked Jasmine and made his way back to the house, where Malik Thompson was finally awake and lucid enough to be interviewed. The paramedics had checked him out and determined that, while he had suffered a concussion, he was stable enough to answer questions. Marcus found Malik sitting in the back of an ambulance, holding an ice pack to his head. Even injured and disheveled, the man radiated an air of confidence and control that immediately put Marcus on alert. Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Johnson. I need to ask you some questions about what happened last night. Malik looked up, his eyes focusing on Marcus with surprising clarity. Detective, thank God. You have to find my wife. These people, whoever they were, they took her. They hurt her, and they hurt me. We need to find her before they do something worse. Let's start with what you remember. What happened after you got home from your wedding? Malik's story was smooth and consistent. He and Keisha had come home around midnight. They had shared a glass of champagne to celebrate their wedding. The next thing he remembered was waking up in the trunk of his car with a splitting headache and zip-tied hands. I must have been drugged, he said, touching the bandage on his head. Someone must have put something in my drink. When I was unconscious, they attacked Keisha and took her. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt you or your wife? Malik's expression darkened. There's one person, Brandon Hayes. He's Keisha's ex-fiance. He never got over their breakup, and he's been harassing her for months. He was at the wedding yesterday, and he seemed very angry. Marcus made a note. What kind of harassment? Phone calls, showing up at her work, following her. Keisha was scared of him, but she didn't want to get the police involved because he's a lawyer. She thought it would make things worse. It was a plausible story, but something about Malik's demeanor bothered Marcus. The man seemed too calm, too controlled for someone whose wife had just been kidnapped. And there was something in his eyes, a coldness that didn't match his words of concern. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you about some documents that were found in the trunk with you. Financial records, bank statements, loan applications. Can you explain what those were? For the first time since the interview began, Malik's composure cracked slightly. His jaw tightened, and he was quiet for a moment before responding. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. I didn't see any documents. Maybe the attackers planted them there to frame me for something. Marcus studied Malik's face carefully. In his 15 years as a detective, he had developed a keen sense for when someone was lying, and every instinct he had was screaming that Malik Thompson was not telling the truth. The documents had your name on them, and your wife's signature. Loan applications for significant amounts of money. Were you and Keisha planning to take out any loans? No, Malik said quickly. We didn't need any loans. I make good money, and we were financially stable. Someone must have forged those documents. Someone forged loan applications and planted them in your trunk while they were kidnapping your wife? That seems like a very elaborate plan. Malik's eyes flashed with anger. I don't know what their plan was, detective. All I know is that my wife is missing, and instead of looking for her, you're here questioning me like I'm some kind of criminal. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to study Malik's body language, noting the way his hands clenched into fists when he was stressed, the way his eyes darted away when he was lying. Mr. Thompson, do the names Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson mean anything to you? This time, Malik's reaction was unmistakable. His face went pale, and his hands trembled slightly before he managed to regain control. I don't think so. Should they? They're two women who went missing over the past 3 years. Both of them were young women of color. Both of them were last seen with men who matched your description. That's ridiculous, Malik said, his voice rising. I've never heard of these women, and I resent the implication that I had anything to do with their disappearances. Marcus leaned back, satisfied that he had gotten a reaction. I'm not implying anything, Mr. Thompson. I'm just trying to understand all the facts. Now, is there anything else you can tell me about last night? Anything that might help us find your wife? Malik was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Detective, I love my wife. I would never hurt her. If someone has taken her, then we need to find them before it's too late. Please, just find her. The plea sounded genuine, but Marcus had learned not to trust appearances. Some of the most dangerous criminals he had encountered were also the most charming and convincing. And something about Malik Thompson's story didn't add up. The massive search operation that followed involved over 50 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies. Atlanta Police Department, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI all contributed resources to what was being treated as a high-priority kidnapping case. But despite the impressive show of force, Marcus Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking in all the wrong places. The search focused initially on the area around Lake Lanier, with dive teams combing the murky waters while K-9 units searched the shoreline. Helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the afternoon shadows. To the media and the public, it looked like a comprehensive and professional investigation. But Marcus knew that they were operating on flawed assumptions. Detective Williams had convinced the command structure that this was either a kidnapping by Keisha's ex-boyfriend or a robbery gone wrong. Nobody was seriously considering the possibility that the victim might actually be the perpetrator. Johnson, I need you to focus on the boyfriend, Williams said during the afternoon briefing. Brandon Hayes, guy's a lawyer, so he's smart enough to plan something like this. And he's got motive, jealousy over losing his girlfriend to a richer man. Marcus nodded but privately disagreed. His interview with Brandon Hayes had been scheduled for 4 p.m., and he was looking forward to getting the man's side of the story. But first, he wanted to do some research on the names Keisha had mentioned to Jasmine. Back at the precinct, Marcus pulled up the missing persons files for Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson. What he found made his blood run cold. Maria Santos, 26, had been a teller at First National Bank of Atlanta. She had disappeared on March 15, 2021, after telling her roommate that she had discovered something illegal at work. Her car was found abandoned in a parking lot in Midtown, but there were no signs of foul play. The investigating detective had concluded that she had probably returned to Mexico to be with family. Alicia Johnson, 24, had been a paralegal at a downtown law firm. She had vanished on August 22, 2022, after leaving work early one afternoon. Her apartment showed no signs of a struggle, and her bank account had been emptied the day before she disappeared. The investigating detective had theorized that she had been suffering from depression and had either committed suicide or started a new life somewhere else. Both cases had been closed within weeks, with minimal investigation. Both women were single, with limited family connections in Atlanta. Both had been dating men who were described as successful professionals, but whose names were not included in the files. Marcus felt sick as he read through the reports. The casual dismissal of these women's disappearances, the stereotypical assumptions about their motives, the lack of any real investigation, it all pointed to a system that had failed these victims because of their race and social status. He picked up his phone and called the detective who had worked the Maria Santos case. Detective Tom Bradley was now retired, but he agreed to meet Marcus for coffee to discuss the case. "I remember that one," Bradley said when they met at a diner in Buckhead. "Pretty girl, but she got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Probably got in over her head with some drug dealers or something. The file says she worked at a bank. Was there any indication of drug involvement?" Bradley shrugged. "Not directly, but you know how it is. These people, they get tempted by easy money. She probably saw an opportunity to make some cash on the side, and it went bad." Marcus bit back his anger at the casual racism. "Did you investigate the man she was dating?" "Some financial guy. Seemed like a good man, very concerned about her. He cooperated fully with the investigation, even offered to pay for a private investigator to find her." "Do you remember his name?" Bradley frowned, trying to recall. "Thompson, I think, or maybe Thomas, something like that." "Why? You think there's a connection to another case?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Can you describe him?" "Tall, well-dressed, African-American. Good-looking guy, obviously successful. He was really broken up about her disappearance, said he was planning to propose to her. It was the same pattern: a successful black man, a vulnerable woman of color, and a disappearance that was quickly explained away by stereotypes and assumptions." Marcus was beginning to see a horrifying pattern. Did he mention any other girlfriends, any other women he'd been involved with? Bradley's expression grew suspicious. "Why are you asking all these questions? Is this guy connected to another case?" "Maybe. I'm working a missing persons case that has some similarities. A woman named Keisha Williams." "Thompson," Bradley said suddenly. "The guy's name was Malik Thompson. I remember now because he had such good references. Worked at some big investment firm. Very respectable." Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. Malik Thompson hadn't just been connected to Maria Santos. He had been the last person to see her alive. And if the pattern held, he had probably been involved with Alicia Johnson as well. "Detective Bradley, I need you to help me reopen these cases. I think we're dealing with a serial killer." Armed with new information about Malik Thompson's previous victims, Marcus returned to the precinct with a sense of urgent purpose. But when he tried to share his findings with Detective Williams, he was met with skepticism and resistance. "Johnson, you're letting your imagination run wild," Williams said dismissively. "So the guy dated a couple of women who went missing. That doesn't make him a serial killer. It makes him unlucky. 2 women, possibly 3 if you count Keisha. All women of color, all involved with the same man. All cases that were closed prematurely due to racial bias. That's not coincidence, Williams. That's a pattern." Williams leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Even if you're right, which I doubt, it doesn't change the fact that Thompson was the victim here. Someone drugged him and left him in a trunk. How do you explain that?" Marcus had been thinking about that question all afternoon. What if it wasn't someone else? What if Keisha discovered his secret and tried to turn the tables on him? "You think she drugged her own husband on their wedding night?" "I think she found evidence of his crimes and tried to escape. Maybe she drugged him to give herself time to get away. Maybe she was planning to go to the police. So where is she now?" That was the question that haunted Marcus. If Keisha had escaped, why hadn't she contacted the police? Why hadn't she tried to get help? Unless... What if she didn't escape? What if Thompson had backup plans? What if he hired someone to take care of her if she became a problem? Williams shook his head. "You're reaching, Johnson. You're trying to make this more complicated than it is." But Marcus knew he was right. Every instinct he had developed over 15 years of police work was telling him that Malik Thompson was not a victim. He was a predator. And if they didn't find Keisha soon, she would become his 3rd victim. "I need to search Thompson's house again," Marcus said. "If he's been doing this for years, there has to be evidence somewhere. You'll need a warrant for that. Then I'll get one. But I need you to back me up on this. If I'm right about Thompson, then Keisha Williams is running out of time." Williams was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But if you're wrong about this, it's going to be your career on the line." Marcus spent the next 2 hours preparing his warrant application, laying out the connections between Malik Thompson and the 3 missing women. When he presented it to Judge Patricia Morrison, she was initially skeptical. "Detective Johnson, these are serious accusations. Are you certain that Mr. Thompson is a suspect and not a victim? Your Honor, I believe that Mr. Thompson has been using his position and social status to target vulnerable women. He systematically isolates them, gains their trust, and then eliminates them when they become a threat to his criminal enterprise. And you believe his wife discovered this and tried to expose him? I believe she found evidence of his financial crimes and tried to escape. He had planned for this possibility and had arranged for her to be eliminated. Judge Morrison reviewed the application carefully. This is highly irregular, Detective. You're asking me to authorize a search of a crime victim's home based on speculation and circumstantial evidence. Your Honor, if I'm right, then every minute we delay is a minute closer to Keisha Williams' death. If I'm wrong, then we'll have wasted a few hours and I'll take full responsibility. After a long pause, Judge Morrison signed the warrant. You have 12 hours, Detective. Make them count. The search of Malik Thompson's Lake Lanier mansion began at 8 p.m. with a team of 6 investigators and 2 K-9 units. Marcus had specifically requested Rex, a German shepherd trained in detecting human scents, hoping that the dog might be able to track Keisha's movements on the night she disappeared. The house was a monument to success and good taste. Expensive artwork lined the walls, and every room was decorated with the kind of furniture that appeared in design magazines. But Marcus wasn't interested in the aesthetics. He was looking for evidence of a darker reality. Start with his office, Marcus instructed the team. Look for financial records, client information, anything that might connect him to the missing women. Malik's home office was located on the 2nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The room was dominated by a massive mahogany desk and wall-to-wall bookshelves filled with financial textbooks and legal manuals. But it was what they found in the desk drawers that made Marcus's blood run cold. Hidden in a locked drawer were photographs of Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson. Not casual snapshots, but surveillance photos taken from a distance. Pictures of them at work, at home, shopping, eating at restaurants. Someone had been watching these women for weeks before they disappeared. Jesus, whispered Officer Sarah Chen, one of the investigators. How long was he stalking them? But that wasn't the worst discovery. In a hidden compartment behind the bookshelf, they found a safe containing cash, false identification documents, and a leather journal filled with detailed notes about all 3 women. The journal was written in Malik's neat handwriting, and it read like a predator's manual. He had documented their daily routines, their fears, their vulnerabilities. He had identified their support systems and figured out ways to isolate them from friends and family. March 10th, 2021. Maria is becoming suspicious about the client accounts. She asked too many questions today about the Rodriguez transfers. Need to accelerate timeline. August 18th, 2022. Alicia found the backup files. She threatened to go to the police. Vincent will handle the situation this weekend. May 8th, 2023. Keisha is getting too close to the truth. She's been going through my files when I'm not home. Wedding is in 1 week. If she tries to expose me, Vincent knows what to do. The name Vincent appeared throughout the journal, always in connection with the women's disappearances. Marcus made a note to track down this Vincent and find out his role in the crimes, but the most chilling entry was the last one, dated May 15th, 2023, their wedding day. Kay is definitely planning something. She's been nervous all week, and she keeps asking about the client accounts. I've moved all the sensitive files to the offshore server. After tonight, she'll either be cooperative or she'll be eliminated. Either way, the problem will be solved. Marcus photographed every page of the journal, then continued searching the house. In the master bedroom, they found women's clothing in sizes that didn't match Keisha's measurements. In the basement, they discovered a workshop area with restraints and cleaning supplies that could be used to dispose of evidence. But it was Rex who made the most important discovery. The German shepherd led them to a storage shed behind the house, where his trained nose detected something that made him whine and paw at the ground. There's something buried here, Officer Chen said, watching Rex's behavior. Something that's been here for a while. They called in a forensics team with ground-penetrating radar, and within an hour they had confirmed what Marcus had feared. There were 2 sets of human remains buried in the yard, both in shallow graves that had been carefully concealed. We're going to need the coroner, Marcus said grimly, and we're going to need to arrest Malik Thompson. The arrest of Malik Thompson at 11:47 p.m. sent shockwaves through Atlanta's black professional community. Here was a man who had been held up as a model of success, a respected member of the community, and now he was being charged with multiple murders. Marcus found Malik at his parents' house in Decatur, where he had been staying since his release from the hospital. The man who answered the door was nothing like the confident charmer who had spoken to reporters earlier that day. His eyes were hollow, his hands shaking, and he seemed to have aged 10 years in the past 12 hours. "Malik Thompson, you're under arrest for the murders of Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson, and for the kidnapping of Keisha Williams," Marcus said, reading him his rights. "This is ridiculous," Malik protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I didn't kill anyone. I'm the victim here. We found the bodies, Malik. We found your journal. We know about Vincent Moore and what you've been doing to these women." At the mention of Vincent's name, Malik's face went completely white. "I want a lawyer," he whispered. "That's your right. But first, I need to know where Keisha is. If she's still alive, you can help us save her. That might count for something when this goes to trial." Malik was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing. Finally, he looked up at Marcus with eyes that were filled with a mixture of fear and calculation. "I don't know where she is," he said. "Vincent was supposed to handle it. I told him to make it look like a kidnapping, but I don't know where he took her. Where can we find Vincent?" "He moves around a lot. Different safe houses, different vehicles. But he usually checks in with me every few hours. If he hasn't called by now, something went wrong." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Vincent Moore was improvising, then Keisha's situation was even more dangerous than he had thought. What was the original plan? Marcus asked. What was Vincent supposed to do with Keisha? Malik's voice was barely above a whisper. "Make her disappear, just like the others. But make it look like she ran away with another man or something. I never wanted her to be hurt." The lie was so transparent that Marcus almost laughed. "You hired a killer to murder your wife, but you didn't want her to be hurt." "You don't understand," Malik said desperately. "She was going to ruin everything. She found documents, evidence of my business activities. She was going to go to the police and destroy my career, my reputation, my life. So you decided to destroy hers instead." Malik's expression hardened. "I worked too hard to get where I am. I wasn't going to let some woman bring me down." Marcus looked at this man who had once been considered a pillar of the community, and he felt nothing but disgust. "You're going to help us find Vincent Moore. You're going to help us find Keisha, and you're going to pray that we find her alive." The search for Vincent Moore became the highest priority for law enforcement agencies across Georgia. His criminal record painted a picture of a man who had made a career out of violence and had no regard for human life. Vincent Moore, 35, had been in and out of prison since he was 18. Assault, armed robbery, witness intimidation. His rap sheet read like a catalog of violent crimes. He had been released from Georgia State Prison just 2 years earlier after serving a 5-year sentence for aggravated assault, but it was his connection to Malik Thompson that made him particularly dangerous. According to the journal they had found, Vincent had been working for Malik for at least 3 years, handling what Malik euphemistically called personnel issues. "This guy is a stone-cold killer," Captain Rodriguez told the assembled task force. "He's been paid to eliminate a problem, and he's not going to stop until the job is done. We need to find him before he finds a permanent solution." The search focused on Vincent's known associates and previous addresses. His parole officer provided a list of places he had lived, and surveillance teams were dispatched to each location. But Marcus knew that a professional killer like Vincent wouldn't be staying in obvious places. "He's gone to ground," Marcus told his partner, Detective Lisa Park. "Somewhere he feels safe, somewhere he can take his time." "What about the original plan?" Park asked. "Malik said Vincent was supposed to make it look like Keisha ran away. Maybe he's still trying to follow through on that." Marcus considered this. If that's the case, then he needs to keep her alive long enough to stage her disappearance. That might be the only thing keeping her breathing right now. They spent the next 6 hours following leads and interviewing Vincent's associates. Most were small-time criminals who claimed to have lost touch with him since his release from prison, but one name kept coming up. Tommy Reeves, a fence who operated out of a warehouse in southwest Atlanta. "Vincent comes by sometimes," Tommy admitted when they tracked him down. "Buys equipment, sells stuff he's acquired, but I ain't seen him in weeks." "What kind of equipment?" Marcus asked. Restraints, rope, cleaning supplies, stuff you'd use to handle problems. Marcus felt his stomach turn. When was the last time you saw him? Maybe 3 weeks ago. He said he had a big job coming up, something that would set him up for life. Said he was going to disappear after this one. Did he mention where he was planning to go? Tommy shook his head. Vincent don't share details, but he did ask about getting a boat, something that could handle rough water. Marcus's blood ran cold. If Vincent was planning to dispose of Keisha's body at sea, then time was running out fast. What kind of boat? Nothing fancy, just something that could get him out to deep water and back. I told him about a guy who rents boats, no questions asked. Within an hour, they had tracked down the boat rental operation. The owner, Eddie Vasquez, confirmed that Vincent had rented a 22-foot fishing boat 2 days earlier. Said he was going fishing, Eddie explained. Paid cash, didn't want a receipt. That's not unusual in my business. Is the boat still out? Far as I know, he said he might keep it for a week. Marcus called in the Coast Guard and requested an immediate search of the waters off the Georgia coast. But even as helicopters and patrol boats spread out across the Atlantic, he knew they were looking for a needle in a haystack. We need to think like Vincent, he told Park. He's not going to take her straight out to sea. He's going to wait until dark, when there's less chance of being spotted. And he's going to want to be somewhere isolated, where he can work without being interrupted. They pulled up nautical charts of the Georgia coast and began identifying remote areas where Vincent might have taken Keisha. Abandoned islands, secluded coves, areas where a boat could anchor without being seen from shore. Here, Park said, pointing to a small island about 20 miles offshore. Blackbeard Island. It's uninhabited, and there are several deep-water anchorages. If I were going to hide someone, that's where I'd go. Marcus radioed the Coast Guard and requested that they focus their search on the area around Blackbeard Island. But even as the helicopters turned toward the coast, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something. The Coast Guard helicopter spotted the rental boat anchored in a secluded cove on Blackbeard Island at 3:17 a.m. Through night vision equipment, they could see 2 figures on the small beach, one standing, one lying motionless on the sand. We have visual contact, the pilot radioed back to Marcus, who was monitoring the operation from the Coast Guard station. One adult male, one adult female. The female appears to be restrained. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. Is she alive? Can't tell from this distance. We're going to need to get closer. The helicopter circled the island while a Coast Guard patrol boat approached from the water. Vincent Moore was clearly visible on the beach, standing over what appeared to be Keisha's body. He was holding something in his hand, possibly a weapon. This is the Coast Guard, the patrol boat's loudspeaker announced. You are surrounded. Release your hostage and surrender immediately. Vincent's response was to grab Keisha and drag her toward the water. Even from a distance, the rescue team could see that she was badly injured, but still alive. He's moving toward the boat, the helicopter pilot reported. If he gets her on the water, we'll lose them. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Take the shot, he ordered. If you have a clear shot, take it. The Coast Guard sniper in the helicopter adjusted his scope, waiting for the perfect moment. Vincent was dragging Keisha toward the boat, his attention focused on his escape route. He never saw the red dot that appeared on his forehead. The shot echoed across the water, and Vincent Moore collapsed on the beach. Keisha fell beside him, but she was moving, trying to crawl away from her captor's body. Target down, the sniper reported. Hostage appears to be alive. The patrol boat reached the beach within minutes, and paramedics immediately began working on Keisha. She was severely dehydrated, had multiple contusions and lacerations, and was suffering from hypothermia, but she was conscious and able to speak. Detective Johnson, she whispered when Marcus knelt beside her stretcher. You found me. We found you, Marcus confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. You're safe now. It's over. But as the helicopter lifted off, carrying Keisha toward the trauma center at Memorial University Medical Center in Savannah, Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. They had rescued the victim and eliminated the killer, but the man who had orchestrated the entire conspiracy was still alive and would undoubtedly claim that he was as much a victim as anyone else. Keisha Williams spent 3 days in the intensive care unit at Memorial University Medical Center, her condition slowly improving under the careful attention of trauma specialists. When she was finally stable enough to give a statement, Marcus was there with a recording device and a stenographer. "I need you to tell me everything," Marcus said gently. "From the beginning. I know this is difficult, but your testimony is the key to putting Malik away for the rest of his life." Keisha's voice was weak but determined. "I found the documents 3 weeks before the wedding. I was looking for a phone charger in his office, and his computer was open. I saw files with names I didn't recognize, bank account numbers, loan applications." "What did you do?" "At first, I thought it was just work stuff. Malik handled investments for wealthy clients, so I figured it was normal. But then I started looking closer, and I realized that the money was being transferred from client accounts into accounts that Malik controlled." "When did you realize the extent of what he was doing?" "When I found the files on Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson. There were photographs of them, notes about their daily routines, detailed plans for how to approach them and gain their trust. And there were notes about their disappearances, like he was documenting his crimes." Marcus leaned forward. "Did you confront him about it?" "I was too scared. I realized that if he had killed these women, he would kill me too if he knew I had found out. So I pretended everything was normal and started planning my escape." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Keisha's expression became bitter. "Because I knew they wouldn't believe me. A black woman accusing a successful black man of being a serial killer? They would have thought I was lying or mentally unstable. Malik had an impeccable reputation, and I was just a social worker from East Point. So you decided to handle it yourself. I decided to get evidence that would be impossible to ignore. I copied all the files to a USB drive and planned to give them to the FBI after I was safely away from Malik. But something went wrong. Vincent Moore was waiting for me. Malik had planned for the possibility that I would try to escape. When I drugged Malik and tried to leave, Vincent was there with 2 other men. They were supposed to make it look like I had run away with another man, but something went wrong with their plan." "What happened?" "I fought back. I managed to get away from them initially, but they caught me when I tried to jump from the bedroom window." Vincent was furious because I had disrupted his carefully planned scenario. He decided to improvise. "How did you end up on the island?" "Vincent kept me in a warehouse for 2 days, trying to figure out what to do with me. He was supposed to make my disappearance look voluntary, but my escape attempt had ruined that plan. Finally, he decided to just kill me and dump my body at sea." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing everything he had heard. "Keisha, I need to ask you something important. Are you certain that there aren't other victims, other women who might have been targeted by Malik?" "I found references to at least 2 other women in his files, women who had worked at banks or financial institutions that Malik had access to. I think he's been doing this for years, targeting women who might discover his crimes. We'll investigate every lead," Marcus promised. "But right now, I need you to focus on getting better. The trial is going to be difficult, and we'll need you to be strong enough to testify." Keisha nodded, her eyes closing with exhaustion. "Detective Johnson, thank you for believing me. Thank you for not giving up." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being strong enough to get through this." The trial of Malik Thompson began 6 months later in Fulton County Superior Court, with Judge Patricia Morrison presiding. The case had attracted national attention, with news outlets describing it as a window into the intersection of domestic violence, financial crime, and racial bias in the criminal justice system. District Attorney Robert Chen personally prosecuted the case, a decision that reflected the high-profile nature of the charges. Malik was facing 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, multiple counts of financial fraud, and federal charges related to money laundering and racketeering. The defense team, led by high-profile criminal attorney Jonathan Blackwood, attempted to portray Malik as a victim of the elaborate frame-up. Their strategy was to argue that Vincent Moore had been the real mastermind, and that Malik had been manipulated into participating in crimes that he didn't fully understand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Blackwood said in his opening statement, "my client is not a monster. He is a successful businessman who made some poor choices and trusted the wrong people. Vincent Moore was a violent criminal who took advantage of my client's naivety and manipulated him into a criminal conspiracy. But the evidence against Malik was overwhelming, The journal found in his safe provided a detailed record of his crimes, written in his own handwriting. The photographs of his victims, the financial records showing the systematic theft of client funds, and the careful planning of each murder painted a picture of a calculating predator who had used his position and social status to avoid detection. Keisha's testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Despite the trauma she had endured, she testified with clarity and strength, describing how Malik had systematically isolated her from her friends and family, controlled her finances, and ultimately tried to have her killed when she discovered his crimes. "He didn't love me," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I was just another target, another woman he could use and discard when I became inconvenient." The prosecution also called the families of Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson to testify about the impact of their loved ones' disappearances. Maria's mother, Rosa Santos, spoke through tears about the 2 years of uncertainty and false hope she had endured. "The police told me that Maria had probably gone back to Mexico," she said. "They said she was just a bank teller who got homesick. But I knew my daughter. She would never have left without telling me. She would never have abandoned her life here." The defense attempted to discredit the physical evidence, arguing that the journal could have been planted and that the photographs could have been taken by Vincent Moore. They also tried to portray Keisha as an unreliable witness whose testimony had been influenced by trauma and medication. But the jury was not convinced. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Malik Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The conviction of Malik Thompson sent shockwaves through Atlanta's professional community and forced a reckoning with the systemic biases that had allowed his crimes to continue for so long. The Atlanta Police Department launched an internal investigation into the handling of the Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson cases, and several officers were disciplined for their inadequate investigations. Detective Ray Williams, who had initially dismissed the case as a simple domestic dispute, was quietly transferred to a desk job and eventually took early retirement. The department implemented new training programs on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity, though many critics argued that these reforms were too little, too late. Marcus Johnson became something of a hero in the black community, praised for his persistence in pursuing the case despite resistance from his colleagues. He was promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of a new unit focused on investigating crimes against women of color. "The system failed these women," Marcus said in an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "We made assumptions based on race and class, and those assumptions allowed a serial killer to operate for years. We can't let that happen again." But the real hero of the story was Keisha Williams, who had survived an ordeal that would have broken most people. She returned to her work as a counselor, but with a new focus on helping other women who had been victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. "I want other women to know that they can survive," she said in a speech to the Atlanta Coalition Against Domestic Violence. "I want them to know that their voices matter, that their stories will be believed, and that there are people who will fight for them." The case also led to reforms in the financial industry, with new regulations requiring more oversight of client accounts and better protections for whistleblowers who report suspicious activities. Several of Malik's former clients filed lawsuits against Peachtree Capital Management, arguing that the firm should have detected his criminal activities. The Malik Thompson case became a catalyst for broader discussions about race, class, and justice in America. Academic researchers used it as an example of how unconscious bias can affect criminal investigations, while advocacy groups pointed to it as evidence of the need for more diverse police forces and better training on cultural sensitivity. Dr. Angela Davis, a professor of criminology at Georgia State University, wrote extensively about the case in her book, Invisible Victims: How Race and Class Affect Criminal Justice. She argued that the case demonstrated how stereotypes about black women had made it easier for Malik to target his victims. "These women were seen as expendable by the system," Davis wrote. "When they disappeared, the default assumption was that they had brought it on themselves somehow. They were portrayed as irresponsible, unstable, or criminal, rather than as victims of a calculating predator." The case also highlighted the particular vulnerability of women of color in domestic violence situations. Studies showed that black women were more likely to be killed by intimate partners than white women, but less likely to receive adequate support from law enforcement and social services. The intersection of race and gender creates a unique form of vulnerability, explained Dr. Jamila Washington, director of the National Center for Women of Color. These women face not just the typical challenges of domestic violence, but also the additional burden of racial bias in the criminal justice system. The case sparked legislative changes as well. Georgia passed the Keisha Williams Act, which required law enforcement agencies to conduct more thorough investigations of missing person cases involving women of color. The law also established a state fund to provide resources for families of missing persons who couldn't afford private investigators. Nationally, the case became a touchstone for discussions about financial abuse, a form of domestic violence that often goes unrecognized. Malik's systematic control of his victims' finances, his use of their identities to secure loans, and his exploitation of their trust were all classic examples of economic coercion. Financial abuse is one of the most effective tools that abusers use to maintain control, said Patricia Williams, executive director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. When someone controls your money, they control your ability to leave, to seek help, to maintain independence. Malik Thompson understood this and used it with devastating effectiveness. The case also prompted changes in how financial institutions handle suspicious activities. New regulations required more stringent verification procedures for large loans and transfers, and banks were required to implement better systems for detecting patterns of financial abuse. In the years following the trial, efforts were made to honor the memory of Maria Santos and Alicia Johnson, the two women whose deaths had been callously dismissed by the system. Their families worked with victim advocacy groups to establish scholarships in their names and to create awareness about the dangers faced by women of color. Maria Santos had dreamed of becoming a teacher. She had been working at the bank to save money for graduate school, planning to earn her master's degree in education. Her mother, Rosa, established the Maria Santos Memorial Scholarship at Georgia State University, providing financial assistance to first-generation college students pursuing careers in education. Maria wanted to make a difference in children's lives, Rosa said at the scholarship ceremony. She believed that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty and violence. This scholarship allows her dream to live on, even though she's gone. Alicia Johnson had been passionate about social justice. She had worked as a paralegal while attending law school part-time, determined to become a civil rights attorney. Her family created the Alicia Johnson Justice Fund, which provides legal assistance to low-income women facing domestic violence. Alicia always said that the law should protect the vulnerable, not just the powerful, said her sister, Michelle Johnson. This fund helps women who can't afford legal representation to escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. The families also worked with Detective Marcus Johnson to create a training program for law enforcement officers on investigating cases involving missing women of color. The program, called No More Invisible Victims, has been adopted by police departments across the country. "We can't bring back Maria and Alicia," said Marcus during one of the training sessions. "But we can honor their memory by making sure that other women don't suffer the same fate. We can do better. We must do better." 5 years after the trial, Keisha Williams had rebuilt her life in ways that seemed impossible during her darkest moments. She had changed her name back to Keisha Williams, legally divorcing herself from any connection to Malik Thompson. She continued her work as a counselor, but had also become a nationally recognized advocate for domestic violence survivors. Her book, Surviving the Perfect Husband, A Story of Domestic Violence and Financial Abuse, became a bestseller and was adapted into a documentary film. The profits from both projects went to support shelters for domestic violence victims and programs that help women achieve financial independence. "I wrote that book because I wanted other women to know that they're not alone," Keisha explained in an interview with Oprah Winfrey. "I wanted them to understand that domestic violence doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes it looks like a successful, charming man who slowly takes control of every aspect of your life." Keisha had also found love again, marrying Dr. James Mitchell, a trauma surgeon she met while volunteering at a hospital. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine equality, a stark contrast to the control and manipulation that had characterized her marriage to Malik. "James saw me at my most vulnerable and never tried to take advantage of that," Keisha said. "He supported my healing, my advocacy work, my independence. He showed me what real love looks like. The couple had 2 children, and Keisha often spoke about how becoming a mother had given her a new perspective on her survival. I realized that I didn't just survive for myself, she said. I survived so that I could be here for my children, so that I could raise them to recognize and reject the kind of toxic behavior that almost destroyed me. The Malik Thompson case continued to serve as a cautionary tale about the intersection of privilege, prejudice, and predatory behavior. Criminal justice experts used it to illustrate how superficial markers of respectability could mask dangerous pathology, and how institutional bias could enable criminals to operate with impunity. Thompson was able to commit these crimes for years because he fit society's image of a successful, respectable man, explained Dr. Robert Hayes, a forensic psychologist who studied the case. He was educated, well-dressed, articulate, and financially successful. These characteristics made it easy for people to dismiss allegations against him and to blame his victims instead. The case also highlighted the particular vulnerability of women in interracial relationships, where racial dynamics could complicate efforts to seek help. Several of Thompson's victims had been reluctant to report his abuse because they feared that doing so would reinforce negative stereotypes about black men. These women were caught in an impossible situation, said Dr. Kimberly Williams, a sociologist who studied domestic violence in communities of color. They were being abused by someone who looked like them, someone who shared their racial identity. Speaking out felt like a betrayal of their community, even though staying silent endangered their lives. The case also demonstrated the importance of believing women when they report abuse, regardless of the social status of their abusers. Too often, the credibility of abuse allegations was weighed against the reputation of the accused, with predictable results. We have to stop asking why women don't leave abusive relationships and start asking why society doesn't support them when they try to leave, said Jennifer Martinez, director of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The system failed these women repeatedly, and it took incredible courage and persistence to finally get justice. 10 years after his conviction, Malik Thompson remained in prison, serving his life sentence at Georgia State Prison. In rare interviews, he continued to maintain his innocence, claiming that he had been framed by Vincent Moore and that the evidence against him had been fabricated. I made some mistakes in my business dealings, he said in a 2033 interview with a prison newsletter, but I never hurt anyone. I loved my wife, and I would never have harmed her or any other woman. These claims were met with skepticism by investigators and advocates, who pointed to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The journal found in his safe, written in his own handwriting, provided detailed accounts of his crimes, the photographs of his victims, the financial records, and the testimony of survivors all painted a consistent picture of a calculating predator. He's still trying to manipulate people, even from prison, said Marcus Johnson, now retired from the Atlanta Police Department. That's what psychopaths do. They never accept responsibility for their actions. They always blame someone else. Meanwhile, the families of his victims continued to seek closure and justice. Rosa Santos had never stopped advocating for changes in how missing person cases were investigated, and her efforts had led to reforms in multiple states. I can't bring back my daughter, she said at a conference on missing persons investigations. But I can make sure that other families don't have to go through what we went through. I can make sure that other women aren't dismissed and forgotten. The case had also inspired a new generation of advocates and investigators, many of whom had been motivated by the failures that had allowed Thompson to operate for so long. These individuals worked to reform police departments, support survivor services, and change the cultural attitudes that had enabled his crimes. The Thompson case was a wake-up call, said Detective Sarah Chen, who had worked on the original investigation and had since become a specialist in crimes against women. It showed us how our own biases and assumptions can blind us to the truth. It taught us that we have to listen to victims, believe their stories, and investigate thoroughly regardless of who the accused person is. As the 10th anniversary of the Thompson case approached, the fight for justice and reform continued. New cases emerged that bore similarities to Thompson's crimes, reminding everyone that the problem was far from solved. In 2033, another financial professional in Miami was arrested for a similar pattern of financial abuse and murder. In 2034, a real estate developer in Dallas, was convicted of targeting and killing women who had discovered his fraudulent activities. Each case reinforced the lessons learned from the Thompson investigation. These cases keep happening because the underlying conditions haven't changed, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, who had become a leading expert on financial abuse. We still have a system that privileges wealth and status over justice. We still have unconscious biases that make some victims more believable than others. The advocacy organizations that had emerged from the Thompson case continued to push for reforms. The Keisha Williams Foundation provided legal and financial support to domestic violence survivors, while the Maria Santos Memorial Fund supported education and awareness programs in Latino communities. "We can't prevent every case like this," said Keisha Williams Mitchell, now 38 and a nationally recognized advocate. "But we can make sure that when these cases do occur, the system responds appropriately. We can make sure that victims are heard, believed, and protected." The case had also inspired changes in how domestic violence was portrayed in popular culture. Films and television shows began to depict more realistic portrayals of abuse, showing how it could occur in seemingly perfect relationships, and how it often involved financial control and manipulation. The Thompson case showed us that domestic violence doesn't always look like what we expect, said filmmaker Maya Johnson, whose documentary about the case had won an Emmy Award. It can involve educated, successful people. It can be subtle and psychological rather than obviously physical. These are important lessons for everyone to understand. The Malik Thompson case left an indelible mark on the criminal justice system, victim advocacy, and society's understanding of domestic violence. Its impact could be measured in concrete policy changes, institutional reforms, and cultural shifts in how abuse was perceived and addressed. The case had led to the establishment of specialized units in police departments across the country, focused specifically on investigating crimes against women of color. These units were staffed by officers who had received extensive training on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the dynamics of domestic violence. Before the Thompson case, cases like this often fell through the cracks, said Captain Maria Rodriguez, who headed the Atlanta Police Department's Special Victims Unit. Officers would make assumptions based on race and class, and investigations would be superficial. Now we have protocols that require thorough investigation, regardless of the victim's background or the suspect's social status. The case had also influenced legal education, with law schools incorporating it into their curricula as an example of how bias could affect criminal proceedings. Students learned about the importance of zealous advocacy for all clients, regardless of their social status or background. The Thompson case is a perfect example of how the legal system can fail vulnerable populations, said Professor David Kim, who taught criminal law at Emory University. It shows law students the real-world consequences of bias and the importance of fighting for justice even when it's difficult or unpopular. The financial industry had also been transformed by the case. New regulations required more stringent oversight of client accounts, better training for employees on recognizing signs of financial abuse, and stronger protections for whistleblowers who reported suspicious activities. The Thompson case showed us that financial institutions can be complicit in domestic violence, said Janet Martinez, director of the Financial Services Coalition Against Domestic Violence. When someone uses their position to financially abuse victims, they're not just committing fraud, they're enabling violence. We have a responsibility to prevent that. As the story of Malik Thompson, Keisha Williams, and the other victims became part of the historical record, it served as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance, justice, and the courage to speak truth to power. The case had demonstrated that evil could hide behind respectability, that predators could use society's biases to their advantage, and that the most vulnerable members of society were often the least likely to be believed or protected. But it had also shown that justice was possible when dedicated individuals refused to accept easy answers and were willing to fight for the truth. The Thompson case taught us that we can't judge guilt or innocence based on appearances, said retired Judge Patricia Morrison, who had presided over the trial. We have to look at the evidence, listen to the victims, and follow the facts wherever they lead. That's the only way to ensure that justice is served. The case had also highlighted the importance of supporting survivors and giving them the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Keisha Williams, Mitchell had become a symbol of resilience and recovery. showing that it was possible to survive even the most horrific abuse and to use that experience to help others. "My survival wasn't just about me," Keisha said in her final interview about the case. "It was about all the women who came before me and didn't make it. It was about all the women who will come after me and need to know that they can survive too. That's what gives my life meaning now, knowing that my story can help prevent other women from suffering the same fate." The case had also underscored the importance of cultural change in how domestic violence was understood and addressed. It wasn't enough to simply change laws and policies. Society as a whole had to recognize that domestic violence could take many forms and could affect anyone, regardless of their race, class, or education level. "Domestic violence thrives in secrecy and shame," said Dr. Angela Davis, whose research on the case had influenced policy changes nationwide. The Thompson case helped bring these issues into the light, where they could be addressed and prevented. That's the only way we're going to solve this problem. As the investigation files were closed and the case became part of legal history, its lessons remained relevant and urgent. The fight for justice, equality, and protection of the vulnerable continued, inspired by the courage of survivors like Keisha Williams and the dedication of advocates like Detective Marcus Johnson. The case served as a reminder that the price of justice was eternal vigilance, and that the most important battles were often fought not by the powerful and privileged, but by those who had the courage to stand up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. In the end, the Malik Thompson case was more than just a criminal investigation. It was a story about the human capacity for both evil and good, about the importance of believing survivors, and about the ongoing struggle to create a more just and equitable society for all. As I conclude this harrowing tale, I want to leave you with a crucial lesson that emerged from this tragedy. The Malik Thompson case taught us that evil often hides behind the most respectable facades, and that our unconscious biases can blind us to the truth when we need to see it most clearly. The women who suffered at Thompson's hands were failed not just by one man, but by a system that didn't value their lives enough to investigate their disappearances thoroughly. They were dismissed, stereotyped, and forgotten because they didn't fit society's narrow definition of the perfect victim. But their stories also show us the power of persistence, courage, and the refusal to accept injustice. Detective Marcus Johnson didn't give up when his colleagues dismissed the case. Keisha Williams found the strength to fight back against her abuser. Jasmine Cooper risked everything to help her friend. And the families of the victims never stopped demanding answers. The lesson is clear. We must listen to the voices of the vulnerable, believe the stories of survivors, and never let prejudice blind us to the truth. We must remember that justice is not just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent and ensuring that every person, regardless of their race, class, or background, is valued and protected by our society. The fight for justice is never over. It requires constant vigilance, unwavering courage, and the determination to keep pushing forward even when the system seems stacked against us. The victims of Malik Thompson deserved better from all of us. The question is, what are we going to do to ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain? Remember their names, remember their stories, and never forget that the price of justice is eternal vigilance.